Hey, sorry, whoever's playing the video might need to unmute yourself so we can hear the audio.
Welcome to the Monday Night Meetup. My name is Susanna Estrella. I'm your host, the Commonwealth Victim Advocate. We'll try to run that video again at the end, and hopefully everybody will be able to hear it because I think it's pretty impactful, really addresses the heart of what we're going to be talking about tonight. Well, it's June, and June is Gun Violence Prevention Month. So I have here with me tonight to kind of speak into this issue that we're facing, some folks from across very different parts of the Commonwealth. And I think that's even going to add quite a bit to this conversation. And then as well as we'll hear a national perspective. I do want to remind survivors that there is no expectation of privacy, that this is on our Facebook Live and then will be aired subsequently on our YouTube channel. So what you said is what you say will be heard publicly. Just want to make sure that everyone is aware of that. So this issue is no stranger to any of us. We all hear it on a constant basis now, every time you turn on the news. I've read some reports last week that in Philadelphia alone in 2022, there's been over 200 homicides already. Memorial Day weekend, 12 people were killed in 15 shootings. 162 students were shot this year, 31 students killed. That's just in Philadelphia. Erie County, which my other guests here from Erie have said that articles saying that they're seeing a rise in youth violence and some shootings involving young people doing the shooting and young people being shot. So these are very, very serious issues. And I'm so glad that we can come together and collaborate and talk about what we see working and how we can help one another. Because clearly this is going to be a problem for all of us to speak into if we're going to see some really significant changes and hopefully some better outcomes. But I'm going to start by asking our panelists to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about your organization and what you all do. We'll start with Amy, if you can tell us a little bit about your organization and then also the guests that you invited here with you tonight.
Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you for the opportunity to be here this evening. My name is Amy Eisert. I'm the director of the Mercyhurst University Civic Institute at Mercyhurst University. But my role here tonight is the research partner for an effort we have called Unified Erie. And with me tonight is Yvette Jennings. Yvette is one of our gracious community partners that works with us. Yvette is unfortunately the mom who has lost 2 sons to gun violence. Also with us tonight is Pastor Daryl Craig. Daryl is a faith leader within our community, but he is also the CEO of an organization called the Creative Community Connectors that the community impassionately knows as the Blue Coats because they're often seen out in the community in blue. And they are actively engaged in outreach, community and street outreach with youth and families within our community. And just Unified Erie is a 3-pronged approach to addressing violence. We follow a holistic approach of prevention, enforcement, and reentry.
Thank you. Jean, please introduce yourself and tell us about your organization.
Hi, my name is Gene Son. I'm with an organization called Resolve Philly. We are a journalism and journalism support organization, and my role is I'm the editor who leads this collaboration of 26 newsrooms on a project called Broken Philly that's about looking at economic mobility and solutions to poverty. And we have, since we started a special kind of sub-project of that in 2021 called The Toll, which I'll share a link to, which is looking at the roots and costs of gun violence in Philadelphia. And also we've been creating space where people who lost loved ones to gun violence can share their own messages directly, not through a journalist, not through someone else. It's part of a program we call With Love Philly, and I'll share the link to that in a minute. And I'm so thankful for all of you to invite me to be here tonight. Every time I get to be on a program like this, I learn so much. So I'm excited to hear about what people are doing all over the state.
That's great, thank you. And then our next person here has a national perspective that he's going to bring to the table. Aswad, please introduce yourself and tell us about your group.
Yeah, thank you so much, Suzanne, and thank you and the office for hosting this extremely important conversation during this time in our country and across the world. My name is Aswad Thomas. I'm the Vice President of the Alliance for Safety and Justice, and I also serve as the National Director of one of our flagship programs, Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice, which is a national network of 90,000 crime victims that are coming together to share our stories, to heal together, and to advocate for more healing, prevention, and recovery over justice system that doesn't prioritize the needs of survivors. And like many of the survivors in our network, I'm also a victim of gun violence. I was shot twice in my back a decade ago, just after becoming the first member of my family to ever graduate from college, just after signing a basketball contract to go overseas to Europe to play professionally. And like many victims, when I became a victim of gun violence, my family and I received no help after that incident. And so no victim compensation, no mental health support, no housing, relocation. But for me, the physical pain, it doesn't compare to the psychological effects of being a victim of gun violence. But what really changed my life was finding out that the young man who had shot me was also a victim of gun violence 4 years before that. And I strongly believe his unaddressed trauma played a huge role with me getting shot years later. And I wanted to do something. I wanted to change that. And that's what led me to joining Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice.
Great, and I'm sure we're going to dig into some of those details a little bit more in the conversation. And anybody can feel free to jump in, but tell me some details about your responses. What does your organization do in response to gun violence?
I can jump in,
Okay.
and I'm quite sure what I will share will be consistent across this panel. So at Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice, we were founded because the voices of crime survivors in those communities that are most harmed by violence, those are the same communities least supported by the justice system, are least supported by victim services. So one thing that we do within our organization is provide a community for crime survivors who connect with each other, provide peer-to-peer support to each other. And also we provide a lot of leadership development training for survivors. So for many of us, we have a tagline that says from healing to action. And so as survivors are on that recovery process, we see organizing, we see civic engagement, we see getting involved in advocacy is play an important role for many crime survivors as well. So part of what we do is advocate for policies and laws at the state and at the local level to ensure that victims of gun violence and victims of all types of violence, one is that they get the resources and services that they need, and two, that we are removing barriers for people to access things like compensation or services. And so for us at CSJ, it's provided peer-to-peer support, it's connecting survivors to each other, it's training them to be advocates at the state and at the local level, and it's changing policies and laws to really prioritize prevention, healing, and more trauma recovery services for our communities.
Thank you. about Unified Erie? Tell us about what your response looks like.
So that's probably an area, what Ashwad just shared is probably what we need to strive to do better on. We focus more so on the prevention and the reentry aspects when it comes to violence, making sure that people who have engaged in violence have those resources that they need when they come back into the community to disengage and be successful. Because oftentimes the response from a community when somebody comes back from incarceration isn't real welcoming. And that creates additional barriers to them being successful in life in general. And so that's where we focus most of our efforts on. We definitely need to do better in regards to the trauma of the victims. We have resources within Erie County through our Crime Victim Center that do provide free counseling, court advocacy to victims of violence.
Okay. Jean, you want to jump in and tell us a little bit about Resolve Philly's response?
Yeah. When one of the things that we have endeavored to do when getting into this area is to listen first before we do. And we do that in a couple different ways. I'm blessed to work with a wonderful community engagement team at Resolve Philly, and we fairly frequently, on a busy month, maybe 3 times a month, organize a thing that we call Sound Off, where we go to with a community partner, and when it comes to gun violence, we're typically arranging a situation where young people in their late teens or early 20s can come and talk and share their experiences and share what they are not hearing about in the news that they feel is gone over. And so we try to start with listening, and then we try to organically listen and find out, well, what could we as journalists do that would be of service to the people who are living with this? So much of journalism about gun violence is from the outsider perspective and for that outsider perspective. And we try to make sure that every story we do, we build in the idea, well, if I'm someone who lost a loved one to gun violence, how would I read this story? Would there be something in this story for me? Because we feel that that's important for bringing our total community together. So that way everyone doesn't have to personally experience gun violence before we feel like we're connected to one another, because we can't let it go that long.
Yeah, that's so important that we find ways to help everybody feel like this is all of our issue. It doesn't have to be just because I knew them or that was my brother or my sister, but it's all of our problem. We all, I mean, just the impact really that we are starting to see on communities at large. This is not something that can be ignored or that we can other. You know, like anytime that we try to say this is the other person's problem, then that's like injustice. We're doing it a disservice, and we won't get far by thinking that this is an inner city problem or this is their problem. And here tonight, we're talking Erie and Philadelphia, so we can see that this is not just, you know, large city problem. So yeah, that's really important. Tell me a little bit about prevention. Now, are the Blue Coats involved in prevention, or what do the Blue Coats do?
Absolutely. So we also do a holistic approach. First and foremost, we do prevention, but we firmly believe if you want to stop the violence, you have to address the violent. And so we find ourselves on a slippery slope most times because we deal with those who are being impacted by violence and those who are causing the violence as well. I'll be in court tomorrow at a murder trial for a couple young men who we had been advocating for and trying to steer away from that lifestyle who unfortunately did not make it out before they wound up in a situation like this. And it can be very trying at times because it seems like a conflict of interest, you know, when you're advocating for nonviolence and then you're advocating for an individual that's perpetrated violence, you know. But we understand that there's some root causes uh, to that. And so we try to deal with the whole problem. The whole problem is going to sometimes have you in a place where it's kind of touchy. But the Blue Coats' main priority has been to provide a safe haven, safe passage to and from school and during school. And so we are monitor 11 sites currently for the Erie School District where we have people stationed at these different schools who are there to head off any potential violence, do as much mentorship as we can, as much encouragement as we can. And one of the things we do is when there's violence, when there's something going on in the streets and it involves school-age children, then whatever that thing was, it's coming to that school. Because the kids don't shed the behaviors out in the streets. It's not like they leave them outside and pick them back up when they come out, you know? And so what we try to do is provide insight and a heads up for the schools. Say, for instance, if we have some east side, west side activity, we locate or try to identify the individuals that participated and then get to their schools before time and let the school know that there's a potential there might be some sort of incident resulting from what has happened in the community. We also go out in the community if we're able ahead of time and try to engage the combatants before they get to school to remind them that school is supposed to be a no-fly zone and that we are aware and the school is aware that this situation exists and that any anything happening at school is going to result in some sort of consequence. But we also do many collaborations with Unified Erie, and we believe and follow that strategy, prevention, reentry, and enforcement, and are very supportive of it. They've been a part of it since its inception here in Erie, Pennsylvania. Also, by the way, just FYI, I'm from Buffalo, New York, where a lot of the strategies that we practice here in Erie actually are modeled after some of the strategies that we use in Buffalo, New York through our Stop the Violence Coalition, our Fathers Program, Mad Dads, all interrupter models. But and Back to Basics outreach ministry, which provides the spiritual component. And so we do some spiritual engagement through our after school programming and Bible studies. We call them the spiritual enrichment classes. And just basically wherever else we can fit in, if we see an opportunity to engage or connect, then we go for it, whether it be making a job referral or going to court with somebody, helping somebody navigate the legal landscape, helping people navigate the process of filing and pressing charges. So it get charges, it can get real skitsy at times. But yeah, the Blue Coats, to your answer specifically, we are heavily involved in prevention. From
That sounds like a lot of collaboration going on there, which
it
is very it's great. It's very important. Let me ask some of the other guests, how have you been successful with collaborative efforts?
As well as working with Unified Erie, me and I call him Brother D. With Daryl Craig, we also collaborate with Hammond Hospital for this program called The Flip Side. and we work with the trauma unit for at-risk youths, or and it's not just the at-risk youth. Now we also implement young people who are going into some form of first responders job, like law enforcement, or the going into the military, or wanting to be what do they call the paramedics, stuff like that. And we work in conjunction with Hammond Hospital and the trauma surgeon. One of the trauma surgeons, Dr. English, he works with us too, where we take them to the OR, the trauma unit, and he gives them a blow-by-blow detail of what they have to do to save you after you've been shot. And it's all verbal. There's no pictures, no film or anything, but the verbalization of what they have to do is enough to have an impact on the children. After that, we go to a conference room, and Brother D takes them through an exercise, and I tell my story, how I lost my two sons and what I go through, and how it's impacted not just my family, but the other family also, because it's not just, when you lose somebody, it's not just me that's losing somebody. The one that's committed the crime, their family's taking a loss too. And they're taking a lot of flack, and yeah. So we work in conjunction with Hammond, and also the program has been adopted by Children's Hospital.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've adopted the Flip Side program and implemented it, and as part of one of their programs there. And that's what we do with the preventive measures. And we also do interventions and mediations. We'll go into the school, and law enforcement works with us when we have to do that. And it's been more successful than it has not. You know, some always, I'm not gonna count those as a failure, because I think as long as there's life in the body, there's hope. I don't believe that there's a hopeless situation. I really don't. But it's very rewarding, and a lot of times it's very painful. But the pain is worth it. It's worth it, because my thing is, if I can help one, that one can help many, and it starts to have a domino effect. And we're just trying to work with the community and get them more involved, get more parents involved to get in the home,
Right.
to get a grip on the home life, to because a lot of the way we were raised is missing. It's not there anymore. No one sits on the porch anymore.
Yeah. Common sense is no longer common.
Yeah.
So let me ask you guys this, and it doesn't have to be something that you're currently doing, but if your answer would be that you do what you're currently doing, then you can just say that. But if money was not an issue, you had the money to start whatever prevention program that you wanted to. Tell me, what would that look like? What do you think prevention should look like? Now, because you're first on my screen, I'll start with you, Amy.
Oh, wow. I you know, the reality is that money has a lot to do with a lot of things. And you can do so much with that, but I just don't know as though money has ever truly solved our issues. You know, right now, I think one of the biggest issues that we're dealing with is the lack of a sense of hope among parents and families and kids. And we're struggling with ways to how that we reinvigorate people with the idea that change is possible, that safe communities can be created again, that we can have that back. So, I don't know as though I have an answer in terms of how I would spend an unlimited on a limited bank account on prevention. If anybody has a key as to what we could purchase to create hope back in everybody, I would be all ears.
Jean, how about you?
There have been so many things that have been a positive effect on our neighborhoods that have been at a slow cut for a long time in Philadelphia. When you look at how few counselors we have in our schools, how few nurses we've had in our schools, how many libraries have either been closed or cut hours dramatically. And this is like, we've had almost an entire generation of kids go through school under those conditions in Philadelphia. Not that it was ever perfect, but like it's been considerably worse for the current cohort of kids who are in high school. And I feel it's not the only reason, but I don't think it's a coincidence that we're experiencing this crescendo of violence when we've sown that lack of resources for so long. I'll be interested, I think there's some people who are eyeing with interest this court case pending about the way Pennsylvania funds schools and how that may or may not affect what we do, because I feel like it's a holistic problem that has holistic roots. But we've made it harder for our youth to find a positive path. And we've had fewer of those avenues open to them. And in a lot of ways, those are some of our most powerful sources of hope.
Oswald, what would you do?
Yes, great questions. What come to mind for me are three things. One is, with the rise in violence in our communities, nothing new. There's violence been happening in our community for decades. And as a result of that, there's just so much unaddressed trauma in our families, in our community. So when you think about, I think someone said there's no hope in our community, right? A lot of that comes from unaddressed trauma. How do we really ensure that we are investing in the things that work? When you look at communities across the state of Pennsylvania, we think about Philadelphia, Erie or Chester, or Pittsburgh, Harrisburg, York. There isn't an infrastructure of mental health services and victim services in those communities for people who are experiencing violence every single day. So we must really think about safety and then really investing in that infrastructure of victim services and communities. Another thing that we have to do, and just, I do this work in Pennsylvania and across the country, and I always hear, just so much amazing work that's happening, that Daryl mentioned, and Yvette mentioned, those blue coats. Those blue coats are out there saving lives. Those blue coats are out there probably waking up at all hours of the night to provide services to families. But we know, and it's a question that I want us to think about: how have we invested in community organizations like Blue Coats? How have we invested in those prevention and violence intervention programs at scale to really meet the need of violence in our community? So for me, that third thing is that because there's been such limited investments in prevention, limited investments in these violence intervention programs, and also mental health, we have to reverse that. Let's get smart about safety. So you want to stop crime and violence from happening. It starts with investing in healing. It starts with investing in the people who have been in the community for decades, that are doing the work, will continue to do the work, but we need to invest in them to help scale up their programs. Many organizations are operating with no transportation, right, to help provide services with no building to help provide safe spaces and services in communities in Austin. Often are all working, majority all volunteer based, are paying out of their pocket for victim services, are paying out of their pocket for hotel rooms, for shelter, for to helping to navigate providing crisis response. That must change, and I think we have a real opportunity right now in this country to really invest in safety, to really invest in the community. Because the question is not about do we have enough money or resources? We do. We've had a lot of resources and money for a very long time. The problem is that those resources, that funding is not going to the places where they need to go. And for us as an organization, we want to empower local survivors and organizations to organize, to mobilize, to get trained as advocates to help change policies and laws that will get our communities more resources and funding as well.
Yvette? You have any ideas, Yvette, you want to share?
What I was saying, that I was stuck for a minute. Everything saying was right on point. Whatever.
I think the connection might be bad. Sounds like we're losing you a little bit. We'll come back to you. How about Pastor Darrell?
I don't know. Do I?
Yvette, you might want to try to turn off your camera because we can't hear what you're saying. It's breaking in and off. Maybe if you turn off your camera, we might be able to hear you. No, we still can't hear you. I'm sorry. Pastor Darrell, did you have something you wanted to add to that point?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, let me know when it's clear.
It's clear.
Hello? Okay. So everything that Oswald said was definitely on point, and it was amazing to me because it sounds just like the Blue Coats. We have never done a fundraiser. We didn't have a building headquarters until recently. Transportation is still an issue, but anyway, as to the answer to your question, I've been thinking long and hard about a need for a teen or youth hub, a hub that is specifically for children, for youth, that will provide every service needed. And then with space and allowance for some of the unorthodox things that we don't think of that would be impactful in the lives of our children. But whatever it would be, that it would be marketed in a way that it would be attractive, very attractive to our children, and that it would be marketed specifically for them, that they would feel that this is something that is just for them, that is sincerely just for them. I think that they've been disappointed in us in being told that, this is there to help and I'm here to help, only to get there and find out that there's so many hoops they got to jump through, or that the help that we're talking about, it doesn't take place until 9 months to a year or more down the road. And these kids are living in real time, dramatic and adverse conditions, and they need help today. They, help next week, it might not work because they might not make it till then. So I think it would have to be a whole lot of collaboration, as you said, but it have to be well thought out, very deliberate, very deliberate, and it would have to be laser focused specifically towards the youth. And the reason why I say that as it pertains to violence now, I believe Amy can answer this better being the research person, but either 80 or 90% of our acts of violence are being caused by juveniles these days. And so it might even be 90%. We knew that this was coming. We saw this 6 years ago. We screamed at every rooftop that the age dynamic is spiraling downward. In fact, 2 days before the 7-year-old was killed, we put up a post and say, hey, we just had a 14-year-old shoot another 14-year-old in school. Next, it'll be 10, 11-year-olds, and 2 days later, a 7-year-old was killed. So, I mean, being at ground zero, boots on the ground, you learn a lot, you see a lot. And we do need serious people to get behind us and support us. But we also need those serious people to take us serious and take what we bring to the table serious, and the insight and the intel that we bring to the table is very, very, very precise and spot on. I don't think I don't have to convince anybody. Whenever we go anywhere, whenever we're in a meeting, they're always touting about what the blue coats bring to the table. Okay, if you all believe that, then bring that support to the table and get behind this grassroots ground zero effort, and let's really save some lives.
Well said, well said. Yeah, that's so true. There's so many studies, even like research studies, that show that the people who are already in the community, that the people respect in that community, are the best people to speak to and solve the issues in that community. So yeah, I'm total agreement with what you just said there. Somebody mentioned earlier talking about root causes. We haven't really discussed that yet. What are your thoughts on what do you think are some of or the root cause of the gun violence crisis that we currently find ourselves in?
So through our efforts, we always look at the Pennsylvania Youth Survey data that is available in PA schools every 2 years. And, some of the things that we've identified that are root causes are parental attitudes that favor problem behaviors. So it's basically parents who think that the bad behavior is okay.
Mhm.
Other things are family management issues, the lack of parental discipline or too harsh of parental discipline, and also the lack of proper limit setting. So kids within households not really knowing what the rules are. And the other one that's big for us in Erie County is community disorganization, a lack of attachment of kids to their neighborhoods. I believe it was Vet who talked a little bit earlier about things being different. When I grew up, every parent on the block parented me, and that was okay. And it was expected. And I still love them all today. But nowadays we have more of an insulated, and COVID made it worse, an insulated mindset that beyond my porch, it's not my problem and not my business. And we need to somehow get back to that community where we're all taking care of the kids, because it does take a village. It's not just on one person's shoulders. It's on all of our shoulders to make sure that we're supportive of these kids down the entire path that they take.
Absolutely. And as the father of a son who has been shot multiple times on 2 different occasions, I pay a close attention in the desire to understand what makes my son tick. What is it? Oswald mentioned that again. I think, and I know the fact that we've neglected to address trauma for so long. that the backlog of unresolved trauma has finally spilled out into the forefront. And it's not just in certain neighborhoods, because this, to me, is the sickest country, the United States of America, on the planet for several reasons. But as it pertains to community violence and the violence we're seeing, we watch traumatized kids come to school for ever since there's been Blue Coats. We started this mission 18 years ago and watch day after day 8-year-olds and 9-year-olds come to school dragging 2 and 3 siblings and find out that that 8-year-old or that 9-year-old was the head of that household, just like I was at 9 years old. And that position had been bestowed upon them through some sort of traumatic situation taking place in that household: drug use, neglect, abuse, incarceration, or parents who had suffered the same, being the kids of kids, and the parent having been abused or in the same sort of situation and not having the skill set to parent. As Amy said, the community disorganization is through the roof. The truth be told, if you look across this nation, we know you can't get 2 churches to work together in the same city in certain communities. It's just the truth. And I know that this is being heard, and hopefully it'll inspire us to stop having that happen. But at the end of the day, it's a truth that we can no longer afford to deny. Working in silos, refusing to work together. All of those things go into making up the community disorganization that we see. We know some of that comes from lack of trust, and it's almost like saying how many bubbles is in a bar of soap when you look for root causes, right? But the overwhelming one for me would be, I see, is trauma, unresolved trauma that's been going on for years after year after year. And with COVID, it's all been accelerated.
Jean, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, I definitely second everything I've been hearing. And what is difficult is that we are having disputes and arguments that are more likely to be deadly because more people have weapons with them. And we're experiencing in Philadelphia, more people feel who they don't, they feel they have to carry one to protect their personal safety. And it kind of spirals from there. And I think there's a definite connection with the way that guns are so prevalent and accessible in our community. That things that would have been a brawl, it's harder for a brawl with fists to turn deadly so quickly. People have a chance to break it up. When guns are involved, everyone scatters.
I agree 100%. The fastest growing demographic in this issue of juvenile youth violence is the young people that are picking up weapons to defend themselves. We've seen youth after youth that never was a problem, never connected to any of the little so-called gangs that were going around, didn't have a whole bunch of behavioral problems in school. Next thing you know, he's in the news for being caught with a gun or actually using the gun. And you find out he's been jumped a few times, threatened a few times, shot at a few times, his house has been shot up. Or, social media, every time he looks on social media, somebody's talking about shooting him. And these kids are going out, getting their hands on weapons. And now we see a lot of kids who weren't even never a part of the problem. And I'm talking about tons of them are now being added to the rolls because it looks like everybody and anybody has a gun and can get one.
So, Oswald, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think, I'll leave it there. That's the truth. When you have young people who are afraid for their lives, when nobody's out there willing to help them, to help save their life, it's about survival. And I think the more that we can address the trauma and ensure that there are program activities for people to do, that's how we want to keep young people safe, and that's how we want to keep communities safer. Address the trauma and ensure that there are programs to do that. Keep young people safe. That's how
If you want to type something in the chat, please feel free and we can read your comments that way. I think it's really, this discussion has pointed out how much collaboration is needed. We've talked about parental behaviors, school issues, and like this is not just like a one person problem. And then you see how this crosses so many different disciplines that if we don't find ways to work together and realize that, oh, this is a piece of prevention, this over here is another piece of prevention, then I think we're always going to be behind the 8 ball. But if we can find ways that we can come together in those different disciplines, then we can maybe get out in front of this. Like ways that a parent, like when you said the study of parental behavior, the parents favoring bad behavior. Okay, so where does a parent like that go to get help to figure out what parenting is supposed to look like? Because people don't know what they don't know. And you cannot give what you don't have. So now we have these generations of people who, my mom didn't tell me because she didn't know. Her mom didn't tell her because she didn't know. And how do we break that cycle and realize as a community that that's a big part of gun violence prevention?
And I think too that, stigma plays a role in it too. As a parent myself, when you have to reach out and ask for help, it does, your initial response is that you're not enough as a parent, and you feel like you're failing. And the one thing that you really don't want to fail at is your kids. And so we somehow have to get the word out there in the service realm as to how to break that down, that asking for help when you just don't know where to go is a good thing. It's a good thing to do. Every kid is different within a household too. That makes it further challenging. And there's nothing wrong with asking for help when you need it.
Suzanne, 2 things. First of all, Amy, you're absolutely right. And that's why we've had so many discussions about campaigning and focusing our energies now on making asking for help and services acceptable. And so the Blue Coats have taken that on. We're working with the Erie School District about how to promote student services and how can we help them get the word out that the services are first of all there and that it's okay to take those services, to ask for those services, to access those services. Even in the family dinner plan, and we talked about Sister Yvette being a model and an example of somebody who has asked for help and leaned on the help and actually benefited from the help, being a good spokesman and that wise. But I also wanted to say this. As a pastor, there's a spiritual principle that I rely heavily on. And the spiritual principle says that in unity, we are guaranteed a blessing. The definition of blessing means empowered to succeed. In the history of the city of Erie, and especially as it pertains to violence, there's only been one effort that to know outside of whatever impact law enforcement makes on its own, to produce tangible and overwhelming results in reducing violence, and it has been Unified Erie. For a period before COVID, we actually experienced a heavy decline in shots fired, shootings, and get this number here, 0 gang-related homicides for a period of over 3 years. 0. As a result of unified effort. So you started this thing off about collaborations. Absolutely. The more voices that join the chorus, the more hands that are put to the plow, the more success comes from that. If there's any help that we need to convince people of that they should try that will work, it's collaboration. Convincing other organizations and other entities and individuals that collaborations work best. Why reinvent what's already there? Why not support what's there? And so that's been a major struggle. But when it happens, when people come together for that common cause with that like-minded spirit, you can't avoid success.
I agree. I agree. Now we just got to figure out how we're going to convince everybody else. But we're almost out of time. I want to ask one more question. I want you to talk a little bit about resiliency and recovery for the families, or if it's like a gunshot victim where the person does not die. What does that look like? Or what kind of services are you providing in the way of resiliency and recovery, helping people or your communities to move forward?
I'll start. When I think about resiliency and recover, that's at the heart of crime survivors for safety and justice. Most of our members are survivors or have loved ones affected by gun violence or domestic violence or sexual assault or other forms of survivors. And our members, like those who are on this call today who may be watching, we are healing through action. I look at Yvette, just how much courage and strength it takes to do this work after losing 2 sons to gun violence. So that's the definition of resiliency and recovery. Just looking at you, Yvette, and at our organization, we, as I mentioned, we want to train survivors to be advocates. We want to train survivors to change policies and laws. And so since we've been founded back in 2013, we've passed more than 50 legislative bills across the country. We've been able to successfully, move $1.3 billion in funding for safety solutions like victim services, like mental health, re-entry prevention work. We've been able to change victim compensation programs in 5 states, and hopefully next year we'll say the 6th state will be the state of Pennsylvania. And we've also been able to grow the number of our trauma recovery center models from 1 center to 39 across the country. A trauma recovery center model is about resiliency and recover, and it's providing that infrastructure of victim services for all victims of violent crime. So what does it look like in places like Philadelphia or places like Erie, where someone become a victim of violence? There's some place in their community that they can go to get comprehensive mental health services, to get services to help them with housing relocation, to get assistance with helping to fill out that long victims compensation program. So that's the movement we're trying to build across the country. That's the movement we're trying to build in Pennsylvania by bringing crime survivors together. We are doing that exactly tomorrow. We have our annual Survivor Speak Pennsylvania event. We have hundreds of survivors comes together from 38 cities across the state to advocate for the passing of the Safer Pennsylvania Act, which is to make changes to the victim compensation program. Another is to provide housing and employment protections for survivors, and also ensure that people are incarcerated, that they are rehabilitated. So when, as Amy mentioned, when folks come out of the justice system, we want them to get jobs. We want them to get housing. Those are the things that stop the cycle of violence. And our crime survivors, at least, are at the forefront of criminal justice reform, not only in Pennsylvania, but across the country. And that's resiliency and recover at its best.
Yes, thank you. I do want to mention that Yvette typed in the chat about the need for kind of trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve, and how previously in the past where there were foot patrols, it was easier to build those bonds and relationships. And I do hear of some areas, I know in Pennsylvania, where they are working on that, community officers, getting them back so that the people feel like they know the officers and that they can build those trusting relationships. Jean, did you want to speak to the resiliency and recovery piece? I think that's a big part of what you all are doing.
We just try to spotlight stories about resiliency and recovery. In fact, one of our partners this week is going to be releasing an hour radio documentary that tells the story of a 2+ year recovery from the point of view of the mother who was helping her son recover at home from his injuries. He had really extensive injuries, and what that meant for her, what that meant for him, what that meant for their family.
Wow, another way to just point out how the problem is so much bigger than maybe what you might see on the nightly news, and finding a way that we can kind of give voice to that so that we can get more people to understand and kind of like buy into that, and to see, even not just even as organizations, but as individuals, what part can I play in making a difference and making things better? Like we hear the studies about how any child needs to make a difference. When we talk about adverse childhood experiences, one caring adult. One. Don't have to be related to them. One adult that will care about them.
No, Suzanne, that's what Sister Yvette was talking about. One of the things we try to promote through our flip side, gun violence prevention, is we make the children follow the path of the bullet. And one of the things I tell them when I introduce Sister Yvette, that even though she suffered her losses some years ago, that the bullet is still moving in her life. And so if anybody I know that can speak to resiliency, I've watched this woman for years, bounce back time after time after time, and use her hurt and her pain, to try to save somebody else. But I like what you said about getting that fact that exists more out there, because it's not over, as we tell the children at flip side. It's not over when they lower the coffin into the ground. It's not over when the person is wheeled out of the hospital most times, because the quality of their life will never be the same. How many people do I know that are in wheelchairs, partially paralyzed, lost the use of this, can't see, just all the different stuff, lost relationships because of their medical condition interfering with their ability to have a normal relation. All of this stuff that goes ignored, and the many young men who survive, because I think it's 80% of the people shot in this country do survive, but the quality of their life is nowhere near normal anymore. And so one of the things that you asked earlier about, one of the questions, I know my answer was consistency. Having to be consistent in our messaging and in our efforts. And as I we did a panel the other day with Ceasefire, and they asked us to give a takeaway at the end of the panel. And my takeaway was, don't let this conversation be in vain. Don't let this last hour and a half that you spent with us be in vain. Everybody can do something. Something, if it is just speaking to that child that walks past your house every morning with his head down, not knowing what the conditions of his home was, but if you just tell that kid good morning, he doesn't have to speak back. But if you say good morning enough, eventually the sun will shine through and he'll answer back. Just little stuff. But how do we get people motivated? Well, we ourselves have to be resilient and consistent. We can't give up.
I agree. And I think that's a great way to end this conversation tonight, with that hope that the work that you do that provides that hope. Sometimes I think when we're in it, it maybe seems like this isn't a big thing or this isn't enough. But hey, one person at a time. You guys are doing the work and we are so appreciative of the work. And I believe that it's just gonna get that hope ball rolling and create more and more hope as people see, oh, Yvette survived. She made it and she's doing something positive. And can point to each of us and say, oh, well, there's somebody, maybe I want to be like her, or maybe I can be like him. That those little things that we do are seeds, and seeds grow into huge trees. I think that's what we have to remember when we're talking about staying hopeful and passing that hope on. So thank you so much for the work that you do, for taking time to be a part of this conversation, for even showing us some more insight into what collaboration can look like. And then as a state agency, this kind of gives us the opportunity when we have other people calling from different counties, and we can say, oh, you should talk to these people here. Have you met this person? And just kind of being able to spread that collaborative effort as much as we possibly can. But again, thank you all so much. We will stay connected as it comes up on our YouTube channel. When people ask even more questions, like I said, we may reach out to you and let you know that someone's going to be contacting you. But thank you so much. We wish you all the best, and please continue the great work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Take care.
you.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.